is the newest novel from award-winning author Tayari Jones, and an Oprah book club pick. So is this work of historical fiction worth all the attention it's getting? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop spoiler-free shop for all things audiobook. If you're new here, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really helps me grow my small channel. Each week I feature a new spoiler-free review from books of all kinds of genres, so hopefully this is a place you'd like to stay. Kin by Tayari Jones is all over the place, as most books are when Oprah puts her name on the cover. I was very intrigued by this book, and I had it on my TBR when my book club decided to pick it up, so I knew I was going to get to it eventually, and what better time than now. I've never read Tayari Jones before, but I am familiar with the fact that she's an award winner specifically for her book An American Marriage. So I was curious because obviously if she's won awards before, the lady knows what she's doing. Kin is the story of two young women growing up in the Deep South. Honeysuckle, Louisiana, to be specific. Vernice is a young girl who has been left motherless at 6 months old when her father killed her mother and then killed himself. I found it interesting that the book really focused on the fact that she was motherless when she was in fact fatherless as well, but I guess when dad's a criminal in this case, he doesn't really get the merit that mom gets, and I guess that makes sense. It also is understandable considering the cast of very strong woman characters that this book possesses. The book really focuses on women, but specifically two young women, black women, growing up in the Jim Crow South, and all of the strong mother figures in their lives. Annie, our other character, has been abandoned by her teenage mom. Shortly after giving birth, her mom just up and left, and Annie was raised by her grandmother. Vernice, who goes by Nisi for most of the book, was raised by her aunt. So you have two young girls who are basically left alone, except they do have people who care for them. They don't mother them, but they do love them. So it's not like these girls are completely abandoned, it's just that they're not mothered. That will become a big theme in the book, but they're very different characters in some ways. In particular, Vernice knows her mother is not coming back. Case closed. But Annie has hope that her mom is out there. She knows Hattie Lee is alive, and she's seeking her. So you've got one girl who has no mother but knows she won't, and then you have another who has no mother but knows she could. And there's a stark difference between the way they react to their situations. The girls refer to each other as cradle friends since they've known each other essentially since birth. But the thing they really have in common that binds them is that both have a hole that only mothers can fill. As the girls get older, they begin to diverge in path, even though they stay very connected. Vernice's aunt has been saving money for Vernice to go on to a better life, so she's planning on heading to Atlanta to attend Spelman College. She doesn't have much, but she has enough to get there and get going, and that's really what's important, that she has a next step. Annie, on the other hand, doesn't really have a next step other than getting out of Honeysuckle. So she gets in a car with two young guys who are cousins, one of whom she's really hoping will become her boyfriend, and they set off for Memphis, which is where her mother's last known address was. Immediately for both women, the state of the Jim Crow South becomes apparent, as things do not go as planned for either one. They both run into obstacles that are really very specific to their race and the time period and the location where they are. And they are fairly harrowing, even though they are extremely different experiences. The girls stay in touch with each other through alternating chapters, and occasionally they turn to letter writing, and that's included in the chapters. Now, I felt like the setting was clearly the Jim Crow South, and there are events that happen to them that are based on the time and place. But for some reason to me, this just sort of felt like a base coat and not really the makings of a historical fiction story. I'm not sure that that was intended, but I think actually the relationship between these two motherless girls was such a strong component of the story that, unfortunately to me, the historical fiction took a back seat. And I don't really think that that was right, but it's how it came across. What's odd is that in reflecting about the events of the story, I feel like there were so many parts of the story that touched on what life was like in the South in the 1950s. Yet again, that didn't weigh as heavily for me as the relationship between these two friends. So it was weird that it did what it was supposed to do, but at the same time, it didn't come across to me as what it was supposed to come across as a historical fiction. But again, that may just be my bias, and I acknowledge that. As the two girls' paths diverge, they begin to expand their social circles and they meet more people who become friends or perhaps more, depending on the situation. And I really appreciated the way the girls stayed in touch. As you see their paths split, it's really interesting to see the choices that the two of them make, because there's sort of this driving force of motherlessness for both of them dictating many of their choices, and they end up in very different places. I think the setting and the characters were outstandingly done. Tayari Jones is a very gifted writer. But I just felt like there was a little too much middle in this book, if that makes sense. I mean, I understand the idea that when you're trying to represent longing and making choices and figuring out who you are, kind of stretching that out actually makes sense. But as a listener, I didn't really love waiting that long to get to where I was supposed to get to. It's fair, it's Tayari Jones's choice, she gets to do what she wants, but I just felt like I thought the book could have been truncated a bit. Interestingly enough, I couldn't tell you what parts I think you should take out of the story, but it just felt like there was a whole lot of middle, a really strong beginning, and I thought a very strong ending. But I'm not really sure why it didn't work for me, pacing-wise. I felt like the ultimate message of the story was that those who know us the longest help carry a part of our legacy. What happens when those people are not with us? Are we still the same person? And what happens when those people go away? Do we lose a piece of ourselves? I thought it was a really interesting thing to acknowledge. And there are characters in the story who make choices to be around the people that they're with, in important parts of their lives all the time. And then there are characters who choose to basically cut off all of those people and just move on with their lives. So it really represents a gamut of kin and what kin means and how you choose who your kin is, because in this book, it is not only by blood. One thing I will point out is I felt like Vernice's aunt and Annie's grandmother were really pivotal characters in the beginning of the story, understandably, as they're raising the girls. But while they are both touched on later in the story, I feel like I kind of wanted a little bit more from them. I didn't feel like they were present in any of the super critical moments that were life-altering for the girls, and I think I would have liked to hear their perspective. This was a hard one for me to rate. I feel like Tayari Jones is a very gifted writer. Her characters were phenomenal, the storyline and the concept was really strong, but this book just felt long to me. I'm sure there are many who will relate to the situations in the story in a way that I can't, and that's fair, and I can respect that. I am not able to put myself in certain shoes in the same way that other people can. But I guess the best comparison I can make for this book is The Lion Women of Tehran. You've got two women who are basically impacted by the same historical events, and their lives take completely different paths. But for me, that took more of a story, and they stayed interwoven in a way that made a little bit more sense than this book. I don't know, I just felt like I felt more impact as a reader listening to The Lion Women of Tehran than I did on this. I don't think I learned as much or took as much away from this book as I did about the history of the Iranian Revolution during The Lion Women of Tehran, and that's okay. They don't have to be the same book, but that was the closest comparison I could find. There is a distinct difference between literary merit and a great reading experience, and I think this is a very merited literary novel. For me, the reading experience was okay. It wasn't phenomenal, but it was decent. It's beautifully written, and it's morally serious, and it has a strong narrative structure. I do feel like the idea of extended pacing really matched the idea of this inherited identity and figuring out who you are and waiting to really discover yourself well, but it didn't match my ideal experience as a listener. I think it caused me to feel the themes a little less urgently, and it felt more like a historical texture to me than it did historical fiction. The book definitely prioritizes emotional realism over narrative pacing, and that's okay. The girls' contrasting responses to maternal absence was something I really enjoyed exploring, but again, I think it could have been a little bit more condensed. I thought the narration was excellent. Angel Pean voiced Annie, and Angela J. Hobbs voiced Vernice. Now, to me, they were not particularly distinct in their vocal sound, but that was fine because the way Tayari Jones wrote voice in this book was phenomenal, and it was very clear to me who I was listening to based on the way they were talking. I'm not saying the narrator sounded identical, but had it been one narrator, it still would have worked, and that's really impressive writing. Overall, I'm not mad that I read this book, but I didn't really love it. I feel a little bit like it's not written for me, as there are things in it that I will never really relate to. But I actually think that's exactly why it's written for me. We read to create empathy, and if I find an experience is not something that I relate to and not something that I understand, that's exactly why I should be reading that book. So I feel really glad that I read it, even though it was not my favorite reading experience, and I would rate this one a 4-star. I feel like it was 4 stars because it was such strong writing and character development. I might ding the plot a little bit, but again, Tayari Jones is taking on something really important here, and I will never fault her for that. Let me know if you've read it, and let me know in the comments what you think and if you agree with anything I've said, or if you think I'm completely off my rocker, which is fair, maybe you do. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion, but thanks for listening to mine. I hope you like and subscribe. See you next time.